Hello, welcome to the Automation1 XA4 and iXA4 product overview. Aerotech is a company that solves your toughest precision motion and automation challenges. Automation1 is a motion control platform consisting of software-based controls and development tools, plus hardware-based drives for servo motors and galvo scan heads, plus other devices. In this video, we will go over the Automation1 XA4 single and multi-axis servo motor drives and the Automation1 iXA4 single and multi-axis servo motor drives with full motion controller. My name is Patrick Wheeler, and I'm a product manager for Aerotech. So we are proud to announce, now available, the 1 and 2 axis versions of the XA4 and iXA4. On the left-hand side, the white drives you see are available in 1 and 2 axis versions. They're what we call HyperWire drives. They do not have a controller on them. They just connect to a motion controller over HyperWire, typically a PC-based or drive-based motion controller from Aerotech. On the right-hand side, you have the iXA4 versions. These ones actually run the Automation1 iSMC controller. They have a HyperWire output because they connect to other HyperWire devices, such as the standard XA4 on the left. With the XA4, you are truly unlocking the power of precision for your motion control application. These products are designed for machine builders. They make precision motion control more accessible with their economical design. They have a simpler integration with a 2-axis design. That means you have less things to wire up. They're still high performance, and we'll go over that in a minute. They're fully supported by the Automation1 Studio and our APIs, which means they're fully software configurable, and you can talk to, especially the iXA4, directly with our APIs. Say on a PC, you can connect and talk to it without going through the studio. And of course, the iXA4 version runs a full motion controller directly on the box. Talking about the connectivity, on the front of the XA4, you have 4 connectors, the HyperWire in and HyperWire out, plus the axis 1 and 2 feedback. If you get a 1-axis version, you will not have an axis 2 feedback. On the top of the device, you have a control supply, your safe torque off input, and also your PSO and high-speed inputs connector. And then on the bottom, you will have your motor supply and 1 or 2 axes of motor outputs based upon your configuration. When you switch over to the iXA4, some things change a little bit. The 1 HyperWire port is no longer required because the controller is running on the drive, so you do not need an input to it, just the HyperWire output. And then you have the 2-axis connectors as well. Of course, again, if you get the 1-axis version, you will not have 2 connectors. On the top of the drive, you have the control supply. You have your STO again. That is a redundant circuit, so there's 2 STO inputs that have to be held closed for the drive to create torque to the motor. Optional, with the IE1 option, you have the industrial Ethernet ports, and then you also have a USB port for connectivity, and also a PSO and high-speed inputs connector as the XA4 has. On the bottom of the drive, it's the same, very similar as the XA4. You have your motor supply and 1 and 2 axis of motor output depending upon your configuration. Standard features on the XA4 include the HyperWire communication. You have 1 PWM power amplifier and digital control loop per axis. That includes your servo, your position, your velocity, your current loops. You have the Aerotech standard axis feedback connector. This is a very nice connector for builders because everything is in that one connector for controlling an axis of motion. We'll go over that in a little bit. You have 1 analog input per axis. The unit has 2 high-speed inputs. The unit itself has safe torque off, and then it has a separate motor and control supplies to the box, meaning that for some reason, if you have to cut your motor supply to the box, the controller still operates. There's some different optional features. The XA4, of course, is your standard drive with no controller. If you choose the iXA4, you get the full iSMC installed as you configure that line item on your order. The MX1 multiplication can be ordered for the drives for the 2-axis version, and then you will get it on axes 1 and 2. It is not available for the single-axis box. It's also in the future when we have a 3 or 4-axis XA4 available as well for those other axes. Same thing goes with the high power output. A 20 amp peak option will be available, and you can add that on axes 1 and 2, or you can also in the future add on axes 3 and 4 when we have a larger unit, which we'll show you later in the presentation. It's important to note that we have a fully featured axis feedback connectors, and that's really nice and convenient whenever you're controlling an axis of motion. The first highlight here, of course, is your encoder feedback, and as standard, we accept square wave and absolute encoder feedback. As optional, you can order the multiplication feature and use sine wave encoder feedback. The Hall effect sensors are integrated in this connector. Those inputs are there. An analog input is there. The thermistor input from your motor, your encoder fault input, clockwise and counterclockwise enter travel limits, your brake output, and also home marker, and all of that is all included in this connector. And so it's very nice to have everything in one, instead of some drives maybe have some of these things as non-standard things. Maybe the drive is meant more for a constant velocity type of axis of motion, and to get these additional I/O items, you have to use up some of your I/O ports on the drive. That's not the case with the XA4. Let's talk about some specs, features, and performance data. The iXA4 controller, again, this is a controller and a drive in one, has some key specifications we'll go down right now. First, it can control up to 12 axes of motion. That means if you have a 2-axis iXA4 and you can configure the iSMC line item correctly, you can configure that to control up to 12 axes of motion, meaning you can use our HyperWire network to connect to other HyperWire drives, and the iXA4 controller side would actually control those other axes of motion as well. The programming language is AeroScript, and also we support RS-274 G-code. Aerotech has engineered those to work together side by side, so you can switch between the two syntax in a single program, or you can just choose to use one of them. Our APIs include .NET, C, and Python, as well as a LabVIEW interface, Epix and Tango drivers as well. The programming tasks you're going to have available to you are 4 as standard, 9 as optional with 1 reserved task. We have about a 5 gigabyte controller file system available on the device, so that's really good for a lot of the automation tasks you might have to do. The supported HyperWire drives that it can connect to are pretty much all of our HyperWire drives, so I won't go through and read those to you, but you can see them. The industrial Ethernet feature on this can connect over an EtherCAT network, and we would be an EtherCAT slave device on that network. And then also Modbus, and we have client and server connectivity on Modbus. And if you order the CP1 option on the iSMC, you can enjoy up to 16 client connections versus just 1 as a standard. But as standard on this drive, you would get Modbus industrial Ethernet connectivity, including 1 server and 1 client connection. The socket interface is also a standard feature. That's a newer feature in the iSMC that allows you to talk over the TCP client and TCP server connectivity. And then to talk to this via the Studio application or Automation1 APIs, you would use Ethernet or USB connectivity. On the drive side of the device, and that would apply to the XA4 and the iXA4, this device could be 1 or 2 axes of motion, so 1 or 2 drives integrated with it. That includes each drive itself. Each axis of motion would have its own control loop. The motor style could be a brushless, voice coil, or stepper motor. The motor supply, it goes up to 240 volt AC at 50 or 60 hertz. The control supply is 24 volt DC. The bus voltage created from the motor supply goes up to 340 volt DC. And then your peak current and your continuous current go from 10 to 20 peak and 5 to 10 amps RMS. The PSO support is, by standard, there's no PSO on the drive, but if you order PSO 6 ordering option, you will get part speed PSO, and that's 3 axes, and that would include 1 axis standard PSO being the version that tracks an actual encoder. The MX1 multiplier is optional. The drive array is 16.8 megabytes. And then also we have this high-speed data capture capability on this drive, like our other drives. Our STO certification is still pending, but that should be going through very soon. Automatic brake control, 4 different types of absolute encoder support, BIS-C, NDAT 1.2 and 2.2, and SSI. The current loop rate is 20 kilohertz. The servo loop is at 10 kilohertz. And of course, we adhere to several different compliance certifications. Highlighting some key features, safe torque off is always a welcome feature in today's world. We engineered safe torque off into the drive, but we also added the feature that we don't only remove torque, but we also help the motor decel based upon the abort decel rate parameter. So that's just an added note for those who are using this product. We made this product great for process integration. You can simply control your system's industrial laser, camera, or any other tool. And that's by any I/O interface that the drive might have. But really specifically, customers love and enjoy using our part speed PSO feature, which tracks your vector velocity command. And that really is intended to achieve your desired process triggering spacing like you see on this image on the bottom right with the industrial laser, if you just use time-based spacing or time-based pulsing, the spacing of your pulses would really overlapping, cornering when you slow down. But when we talk about spatial domain or vector velocity tracking, you see how this pulse spacing stays consistent even as you change speeds through the corner. We also are able to trigger data acquisition with the XA4. These two high-speed inputs are great inputs for that. And this allows you to trigger 2 unique data collection events on the XA4. With that 5 gigabyte of storage on the device, you can save a whole lot of data and extract that later using the APIs or the Studio application. A nice thing to think about here with this new drive, and the XA4 is on the far right of this image, is that comparing with previous products or current products from Aerotech, it's smaller in size, it's more economical, but you still get that 340 volt DC motor bus, right? So that's really the highlight from the table in the top left of this slide. The XA4 has the smallest possible panel space when you take into consideration our airflow specification for mounting drives in a panel. The cost for this drive is the lowest of the 3 shown here, and that would be the 2 axes of XC2 or 2 axes of XC4. Well, if you get a 2 axis XA4, that's going to be a better deal for you. But you still have that 340 volt DC bus power. So you're not sacrificing anything on the power output here, but you're getting a smaller panel space and you're getting high performance and you're getting it for a better out-the-door price. And here's the winner for everyone. We're still achieving sub-nanometer in-position stability with this product. This test data is available on our educational library on our website. And our testing platform is a cross-roller bearing linear motor stage, and the stage is a granite table with a passive error isolation support, and it's supported by a steel weldment. The test that we do is we just command it to hold position, and we read the in-position stability and measuring the integral encoder feedback signal from the stage, which happens to be a 1 volt peak-to-peak sine wave. Okay? And we've tested all of these Automation1 drives over the years as we've released these into the market space. We've done as good as 0.11 nanometers. We consider that to be industry-leading performance. Likewise with the XL2E at 0.12 nanometers in position stability. Now the XA4 still achieves 0.55 nanometers of in-position stability. And that's on a recent test that we just performed just to compare it to the other products that we have. And the thing I really like to show everyone is that one of our highest performing A3200 products, the N-Drive MP, well, this drive is outperforming it. So we are not engineering a cheaper drive. We're not engineering a low performance drive. We are making Aerotech performance, Automation1 performance, more accessible to users across the globe. So there's even more coming soon. Now that you're excited about this good performance, smaller panel space, higher powered product from Aerotech, it's only getting better. Coming soon will be a 4-axis version of the XA4. That's 2 additional axes of motion control in one box. The iXA4 will include a motion controller. That's what you're looking at here on the screen. That motion controller and 4 axes of control in one unit will take up far less space in your machine. It'll be far more economical for your systems, and it will include the high performance motion that you expect from Aerotech and the Automation1 motion control platform. Of course, you'll have the 2 additional motor output and feedback connectors and 2 additional analog inputs on this device. And if you have a keen eye, which I'm sure many of you do, I'm sure you saw this high density I/O ports on the right hand side of this drive. Let's talk about that. On the standard XA4 and the iXA4 and all iXA4 versions, we will have I/O options coming soon. This will include standard density I/O, which is 16 and 16 digital ins and outs, 2 and 2 analog ins and outs, your auxiliary encoder and interface, and also 2 sync ports. Okay. On the high density version, which is what we're showing, you'll see 2 kind of rows or columns of orange push pins, and it might be hard to see, but the wires go right in the middle of that. This has 32 digital inputs and 32 digital outputs. It has 3 analog inputs and 6 analog outputs. It has the auxiliary encoder interface and also the sync ports. If I go back to the I version real quick, on the top of the drive, you'll still have the industrial Ethernet connectivity option. So this device will really become the center of your motion control application, meaning that you can connect to I/O directly, you can connect to this over the EtherCAT or Modbus interfaces we talked about earlier. You can use the Ethernet port on the front of the drive to use our socket interface to talk to the device. You can use the HyperWire output port on this 4-axis version to connect to another XA4. So if you want an 8-axis system, just use that iXA4 for your first 4 axes and connect the HyperWire output port to the HyperWire input port on the XA4, and you have an 8-axis motion control system from Aerotech. This unit is as tall as the 2-axis version, so it doesn't get any taller. They only get slightly wider, and this is all coming within the next, say, 6 or 8 months from Aerotech. The ordering options is available today for these products on the iXA4. We'll have you choose an AC motor supply. We do have plans to bring in a DC-based version of the iXA4 and XA4 to the market. So in the future, you'll choose either AC or DC. For now, you'll choose between the AX1 and AX2 options for 1 or 2 axes of control, the 10 or 20 amps peak current option, and that is for axes 1 and 2. The multiplier option for axes 1 and 2, MX0, which would have no multiplier, or the MX1 option, which includes the multiplier. The industrial Ethernet, which is a required choice you make, but not required that you choose it. When you do configure this device with AX2, that would be a 2-axis version. IE1 comes with that as standard, so you must choose it. And then also for the PSO support, you can choose no PSO firing or 3-axis part speed PSO. The Automation1 XA4 has very similar ordering options, so we won't go over the motor supply or the axes or the current. What I'll really just highlight here is that industrial Ethernet is not something you choose on this device. So that's it. That covers it. We look forward to many customers and new prospects unlocking the power of precision with the XA4. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about these exciting new XA4 and iXA4 products from Aerotech.